It's the Richie Allen Show, live from Salford, a stone's throw from Media City, UK. It really is. I run around there sometimes and I shake my fist. I'm a bit of a coward. Someone said to me before, why don't you run into the buildings and make a big scene? I've never been that sort of a person. I can make a scene, all right, but not like that. So I run past the BBC and ITV and I just shake my fist. Tony Gosling is a terrific guy. He's an author, a broadcaster, probably the man who does most of the work for the BCfm Politics Show, which airs every Friday at 5 o'clock UK time. He's also one of my oldest pals in the media, even though we've never met face to face, which is kind of strange, isn't it? Welcome back to the programme, our very own Tony Gosling. How you doing, T?
Well, welcome to the world of Zoom, where all our relationships are in the metaverse, Richie. One of these days we must have a pint together. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's interesting, the you sitting right next to these massive conglomerates with their multi-billions of pounds flowing through them every day, and their employees that are sitting there more concerned about their mortgage than they are about actually doing journalism. And that's the main problem, I think, in the mainstream press, is that, as I've seen in my journalistic lifetime, which is started in the late 1980s, and working for 4 years in the BBC, first as a researcher and then as a journalist, is that the fact of the matter is many of these people are much more concerned about keeping their job, keeping their prestige, nepotism. Now, I saw a tremendous amount of that. Some of the old, what you might call old hacks, old producers, and that's me. I'm a producer-presenter. That's what I basically do. Produce the program, present it to every Friday. But I saw some of the really older people, I mean, I'm talking about middle-aged really, who were seasoned hacks, producers, brilliant contact books, absolutely 100% dedicated to the job that they did, which was informing the public about what the rich and powerful were up to around the world, particularly in London. I saw those people being elbowed out of their jobs, being basically just put out to dry. Some of them being just replaced by friends of for example, program organizer, chums. We had some information in our newsroom that some of the people were simply getting jobs because they'd slept with the program organizer, that sort of thing. So I witnessed that, and what we're now seeing with your ITVs around the corner from you and the BBCs is the ultimate, I suppose, nemesis of this whole mass media, is that it's been completely compromised, first through COVID and now with all this wall-to-wall Ukraine propaganda.
We'll talk about Ukraine in more detail in a moment and some of the allegations made in recent days from both sides about, chemical weapons, attacking hospitals. We'll get into that. Brilliant to hear from you, having gone through that, working for the greatest broadcasting organisation in the world. It's a real insight for people to hear how it used to do it right, or it tried to do it right, and how those people were ultimately moved aside, and all of that leading up to what we have now, which is a strange day. The proper day to talk about this. I'm a football fan, Tony. I love the sport. And I'm a Manchester United fan. It's not a great time to be one, but I love the sport anyway. I watch everything. And I go to Salford around the corner, Salford City, not so much lately, but I do. Roman Abramovich, no matter what anybody might think of his money or how he came to have his money, is a private citizen that doesn't have a criminal record. We've seen something happen today. At the stroke of a pen, government can say, we believe that you're pretty pally with the president of your country. Therefore, we can seize your property, sell it off, withhold the money, freeze your bank accounts. But Tony, if they can do that to Roman Abramovich, they can do it to anybody.
Yes, they certainly can. I mean, his crime is that he's a Russian and he's got money. He has been cancelled financially because of his points of view, his sympathies perhaps, that he's not 100% against what's going on in Ukraine now. And this is the Magnitsky Act style legal operation against him, to close him down, to shut him down. So the Magnitsky Acts were brought in the States first. This is about 8 years ago. And we've got another one apparently going through the British Parliament now to make it even more stringent. The idea is that a Russian They say it's to stop organised crime, right? Well, there's plenty of organised crime from the Saudis, etc., in war crimes even in London, but that's not being targeted. They can just literally, at the Foreign Office and the Treasury, they get together and they will just put someone's name on a list. That person is no longer allowed to operate bank accounts or financially in the UK. And that's now a fact. Just literally writing someone's name. There's no legal procedures involved. You can't appeal it. And it's totally outside the law. So he is basically part of what is, I think now, a Russia hate campaign. You know, the 2 minutes hate in 1984 in George Orwell's book, where you had the members of the public were allowed 2 minutes a day to scream and shout at Emmanuel Goldstein, it was in 1984.
Yeah,
now it's
right.
Vladimir Putin. And this is just a part of that. Here's another Russian for you to hate today. And by the way, here's your equalities policy, where if you start acting in a racist manner in any way, you can be sacked from your job as well. So try and make sense of those two contradictions.
Right. I agree with all of that. You and I spent, we've done, I reckon we've done probably close to 100 shows together ever since my days on the Costa del Sol. We would have talked quite a bit about the demonization of the East, the demonization of Russia and China by governments here and by the media. And we would have had a lot of common ground. And I think we still have quite a lot of common ground. Russia would have a grievance, of course, because of what has happened since the fall of the Berlin Wall. But whatever about Russia's genuine grievance about, you know, Ukraine joining NATO, which is untenable to Russia, joining the European Union, untenable to Russia, understandably. Nothing excuses rolling, you know, military hardware into a country outside cities and shelling those cities where, you know, average men, women and children are going to die. Nothing excuses that, in my opinion. Putin is in the wrong there. How do you respond to that? What do you think?
Well, look, everyone is pointing the finger at Putin, aren't they, in these 2 minute hate campaign things? You know, this figure of Putin, the evil one. Well, if you go back, as we pointed out on my program last Friday, if you go back to the middle of February, Putin was trying to basically knock back decisions that have been made in the Russian parliament in Moscow, the Duma, to recognize the two breakaway republics of Lugansk and Donetsk. So he was saying, hang on, guys. What you're saying here is that we are going to have to actually go and recognize these states and protect them. This is a major decision that the Russian parliament had made. And so he then kicked the decision back to the Russian parliament, and a week later they came back with a unanimous vote. Yes, you must recognize these states. And also that means basically protect them from the Azov battalion, the Ukrainian army that are shelling these two countries. And so he was kind of the way I see it is that he's been put into a position where since 2014, as people will know, there was a coup by the United States, Victoria Nuland and the European Union in Kiev, where they took over control of the country through shooting some of their own supporters. And ever since then, we keep hearing this annoying thing where, Ukraine is a sovereign country. Ukraine is not a sovereign country. Ukraine is managed from the West. It's managed from the United States and it's managed from Brussels, but mainly the US. They're the people that have the big say in there. So they have elections, yes, but like many of our elections, all of the major candidates, like last time Zelensky, who promised to do negotiations, which he then reneged on, those candidates are controlled and owned pretty much by the West. In Zelensky's case, it's the oligarch Kolomoisky who basically owns him. He funded him to get into the running and funds him now he's in power. So the idea that Ukraine has just simply slowly but surely drifted over to, support of the EU, support of the United States, support of NATO is just not the case. And the other thing is that it's not being totally Putin's choice. Obviously, he's president. He takes the rap at the end of the day. This is something that he has been pushed into doing by the Russian parliament. And the three demands, I think it's, if you don't mind me mentioning them, that the Russians made, all seem to me totally reasonable. Now, I heard the BBC yesterday on their bulletin saying, the Russians are saying this, but they weren't saying what their demands were. Yeah, well, they did half an hour before, and they did the previous day. So the bulletins on the BBC are trying to deceive you that the Russians don't even know what they're doing. They do. It's very, very clear. Demand number one is that Ukraine gives Moscow the guarantee that they're not going to join NATO. Right? Number one demand, which is reasonable when you think that this is 300 miles these nuclear missiles could be from Moscow. So, and all the promises that were given before about that they wouldn't join NATO. So this is about basically standing up for previous promises, saying, look, you promised they wouldn't join NATO. No. So that's number one. Number two is that the Lugansk and Donetsk breakaway republics should be allowed to break away if they wish to fully by Kiev. And the final one is pretty much a slam dunk anyway, which is that Crimea should be allowed to join the Russian Federation. So he's saying these three parts of the old Ukraine, you're just going to have to say goodbye to them. If they want to, they can leave you.
Can we go through? Hang on, T. Hang on. Can we go through those? We've got loads of time because you're generously giving us more time today. Can we go through those one by one? Ukrainian people might be well entitled to say to the demand that Ukraine doesn't join NATO. They might say, well, Mr. Putin, you're proving by invading the country and by shelling towns and villages, you're proving us right to want to join NATO to begin with, because when you don't get your way and you don't like what somebody does, you just roll the tanks across the border and you shoot people. You see, they might say that, the Ukrainians. This is why we want to join NATO.
They might say, yeah, but you see, that would bring them into a nuclear confrontation, wouldn't it, with the West? Do we want that?
No, of course
not. Do we want that?
No. But I'm seeing it from their point of view, from the people's point of view in Ukraine. The people who might not be privy to the information that you are on not the BCfm Politics Show, the guests you have on. You see, we know certain things, you and I, because we've been lucky enough, well, not lucky, you're a very talented journalist, but we've met people over the years, and we're privy to things. But the ordinary man and woman in the street are not privy. They look upon the Russians as a big bullying, thuggish, tyrannical next-door neighbour who's just rolled into town. And they might be saying, well, we can't wait to join NATO now, because if we do, they won't be able to do it again in the future. Back to you.
Well, I understand your argument, but the Russians have stated categorically at Christmas time that they cannot tolerate the continued pouring in of weapons by the West into Ukraine and what they call the militarization. Now, they said also the Nazification, and that they want to de-Nazify the place. But the main problem they've got is that there are weapons pouring into Ukraine, which is really like a red rag to a bull to the Russians. So this is why I think they've just been clearly saying over Christmas, they said, we want a new agreement. Now, the Americans just threw it back in their face. We're not interested in a new agreement. And they started throwing, and the British and others started throwing more anti-tank weapons in there. And the Russians have just said, well, we've had enough of this. The Duma has voted, and they've now acted. Now, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but they have got a sovereign right to decide how to protect their own country. And that's what we've been doing over the last 30 years.
Yeah, I agree.
Inching further and further towards them, really taking the mickey, Richie. We have been having colour revolutions in countries, having our people take over those countries. I would suggest that many of the Baltic states, if they'd have been allowed to be independent, might have much preferred to be independent rather than part of NATO. So, we have almost the elephant in the room here is that many of these ex-Eastern European countries that were part of the Warsaw Pact originally, they have slowly been infiltrated and taken over by Western money, Western banksters, Western politicians, Western intelligence services. And as I was chatting on Friday to Scott Ritter, who did a particularly brilliant half-hour's analysis of what's going on, again, not condoning what the Russians have done, but just understanding why they've done it. Not patting them on the back, but really pointing the finger at NATO and saying, told you so. If you carry on like this, this is bound to happen.
Fair enough, and you make a good point. You make a very good point too. He's a very good guy, Scott Ritter. I've heard him a few times on your program, and I think 4 or 5 years ago he was on this program and he was brilliant. I don't know why he's not been back, but I know he's a good pal of yours. He's a very good analyst. You make a good point. It's pretty rich of the UK and the United States to condemn Russia for invading a country on the basis that it needs to protect itself. Wars of aggression waged by this country and the United States over the years have been justified by the spurious claims that, well, we needed to invade Afghanistan, we needed to invade Iraq because there were things going on there that represented a direct threat to us. So that's a brilliant point you're making. We have we don't have a leg to stand on in this country to criticize Russia for doing what it's doing. But I'm not the virtue signaler here. I look at the humanitarian cost of it. We have a couple of million refugees left the country already. And that's what I want to get into with you, because I'll get this with you that I won't get from many other people. We spoke very briefly today. Tony Gosling is our guest, former BBC journalist, the man behind not the BCfm Politics Show every Friday at 5 from Bristol. Go to thisweek.org.uk. I know you listen to it. If you haven't before, check it out this coming Friday. You spoke to me briefly today to confirm that you could make it today. Thank God for that. And you said to me, Richie, all of this ultimately supports or assists or benefits the Great Reset agenda. This is important. Elaborate on that for me, please.
Well, it's really, really crucial, isn't it? Because the sanctions that we're putting on Russia, we've seen already 20-25 pence a litre go on to fuel over the last week or so. So this is self-harming. This is punishing the British public for a policy decision by whoever it is, the Treasury, the government, Downing Street, the Americans, and it's going to cause what they call, it looks like anyway, it's going to start causing, as it's already started causing, what they call stagflation. Is where you start getting everything going up in price. So if fuel goes up in price, everything goes up in price. So that means all our goods and services, the guy that comes around to, the plumber to fix the tap, he's going to have to be paying more for fuel and everything that he's buying to do his job, because all that has to be, transported around the country. And yet at the same time, we're being told, you've got to pay another, £100 a month rent at the same time. So this is driving people into poverty. It means they don't have the disposable income to spend. So you get more and more companies going to the wall. You get less tax revenue for the government. It is an absolute economic disaster. But you know what? It's about having nothing and being happy, isn't it? Well, I don't know about the being happy part, but it certainly very much fits in with this whole Klaus Schwab thing, is that we want basically everybody to be beholden to us for every penny that they spend, and in their daily income to be begging and scraping and bowing to the banks. Oh, please give me my income every day. So they have no, ultimately, people are going to have to have far less ability to buy a house. They'll have to be renting it. And isn't it strange that Lloyds Bank last year put out a press release saying that they intend to be, in 8 years' time, the biggest homeowner in Britain? It's because people are going to be defaulting on their mortgages. People are not going to be able to afford to buy houses. And so the idea is to drive all individuals, that's Klaus Schwab's big plan, into such poverty that they have to come to him and Prince Charles, who's his big helper in all this, and beg for everything that we have. So I think that's another side to all of this, Richie. We're looking at an enormous self-harming operation financially and economically by trying to cut links with Russia. And, they've realized that the oil and the gas are too much to stomach straight away. But then also this is another thing completely separate to all of this, is there are speculators making an absolute fortune on the derivatives markets, on the futures markets. And what we're doing now is we're not paying the realistic price for oil or gas. We're paying the price the speculators want us to pay, which is usually far, far more, because they're throttling back the supply so they can increase the price. So there isn't any proper regulation, particularly of fuel prices in this country. Really, the oil industry is in the driving seat. They can charge whatever they want, and their shareholders will be rubbing their hands, Richie, as will Klaus Schwab and Prince Charles, the World Economic Forum great resetters.
Do you think we've never kind of butted heads, but we've had good old debates about this over the years. When these crises come about, they benefit one group of people. It's a tiny group of people. It's the wealthiest people on planet Earth. And I've come to believe over the years, not easily or readily, it took me some time, to believe that pretty much everything is controlled. And I believe that however sincere Vladimir Putin might be and his government in holding back NATO and protecting Russia's interests, I also believe these people take orders too from other figures and other organizations. Some we know, some we don't know. There's no bigger expert in the world, no better red man on Bilderberg and control than you. So I submit it to you that the Ukraine crisis is real. Russia has rolled in. Refugees are on the run. The Ukrainians are digging in. But that it's actually definitely deliberately part of that technocratic agenda, that dystopian, awful Great Reset agenda, and that it's been set in motion now, the Ukraine crisis, deliberately now at this time, right at the end of COVID, or allegedly at the end of COVID, right, just literally days after it, and that is deliberate. This impoverishment of people, costing them their properties. It's not just the speculators and the greedy and the banksters who want the properties and the money, that there's something deeper and darker going on, that this is about changing our opinions, emptying our pockets, and I suppose acclimatizing us to a new way of living. I don't know how you feel about that, if you feel it's that much controlled. What do you think?
Well, yes and no. It certainly is control from the West, and the punishing economic situation is being imposed on us by the British government, the US government, and by the banksters, by the City of London, the hatred that they've got of the Russians. Now, I mean, what you're implying there is Putin is in on this in some way. I don't believe that. I don't believe it. And I'll tell you why I don't believe it, because you have to go back to 1999 and look at when Putin first came to power and how he did it. Now, he became very pally in the 1990s with the chief oligarch, Boris Berezovsky. Now, he'd been trained with about 11 other oligarchs over in Switzerland to basically rape Russia. So they arrived in 1990 at the fall of the Berlin Wall, and these oligarchs were given pretty much limited finance from Switzerland and the City of London and other places, Wall Street too, to buy up and sell off all of the massive state infrastructure in Russia. And they did that for over the period of most of the 1990s. Now, Putin was quite friendly with Berezovsky, and he was number one oligarch for two reasons. One, well, he had the Mercedes franchise, which was extremely lucrative over in Russia. He also controlled NTV, which was the first ever private TV station in the former Soviet Union in Moscow. And it became, everyone started to watch it over in Russia because it was like a symbol of perestroika. He was a very, very powerful man, a very, very wealthy man. And Berezovsky was also trying to kick off the Second Chechen War, because they like to have these little terrorist things going on, like we had Northern Ireland, to train their troops, to keep everybody on the back foot, where you've got a security state who, you've got to run to the state constantly for your security. And the Second Chechen War started kicking off in 1999 with the blowing up of a massive tower block, a residential tower block in Moscow. Now, a couple of weeks after that, there was one in Ryazan, which is another city in Russia, and they discovered the bomb before it went off. It was a massive, massive bomb which had been placed there by, guess what, FSB officers, right? That is the organization that Putin had just recently been part of. I think he was, at that point, he was acting prime minister. But he helped cover that up. That's what I believe. And that's why Berezovsky decided, look, he'd make a great president, because I know that if he was to step out of the line, I can just dish the dirt on him being involved in this and take him out. So he was put forward as the president to replace Yeltsin in 2000, and he won in 2000. But the first thing Putin did when he got into power was talk to the prosecutors in Moscow and say, what have you got on Berezovsky, quietly? And they found a whole load of stuff to do with the Aeroflot privatization, which had been quite obviously criminal. And then so Berezovsky gets a call from Putin. One evening, he says, I think you better get on the first plane out of Russia, and I'll sort it out over the next few days, but they're coming to arrest you in the morning. And Berezovsky shouted and screamed at Putin, "What the hell do you think you're doing? Stop the prosecution now." He said, "No, they're going to come for you in the morning. Because I'm your friend, I'm giving you a phone call to let you know. But I'll sort it out in the next few days." Well, Berezovsky got on a plane to London and he never came back to Russia. So what Putin had done was making sure that now he was president, he was going to use his power to take out the very top oligarchs that have been preying on his country, raping his country for the previous 10 years. And at that point, he turned the tables on the oligarchs. Now, I think that Russia is now a truly independent country, that they do things their own way. And the reason they've done this now is because they have bought time over the last 20 years, Richie, to build their military up to the point where they are confident enough that they can go in soft into Ukraine. Well, obviously, the people dying over there,
it's not soft to them. Yeah.
It's certainly not a full-scale takeover invasion, the sort of thing that we did, for example, in Iraq, that kind of thing. But so they are doing this because they have the confidence to do it, and they need that buffer zone of independent countries, Belarus and Ukraine, to keep us away from Moscow.
Now, that's what they say.
What's happened here.
And you've put that very well. And there are a lot of people listening to this who absolutely agree with that. I agree with most of it. Like, I'm not so, I don't go for the binary choice. I know that things are complicated and nuanced. So it's not a case of either Putin is in on it or he isn't. It doesn't work like that for me. I know it doesn't work like that for you. But you talked about him going after oligarchs. In fact, this came up on a show we did a couple of years ago. It was very interesting. The problem with that theory is that there are still plenty of oligarchs around. There's enough of them around to be sanctioned by the UK government. Men, allegedly, with some friendships with Vladimir Putin, men who have billions and billions of dollars in assets and in money. And some would argue at the expense of the Russian people. So why didn't Putin deal with those oligarchs? Or did he have, preference for oligarchs depending on what they did for him, maybe?
Okay, well, he just realised that there was a hierarchy amongst them, and he decided to take out the top 2 or 3. I'm not sure the other guy's name. There's another one in Switzerland. I can't recall his name now, but he was, again, a similar sort of situation as Berezovsky. He was told, look, you've broken the law here, 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 and here. And these were, so look, the message ultimately to these oligarchs in Russia still, and obviously the ones outside, but most importantly in Russia, is don't mess with the Kremlin. Do your gangster stuff, get on with it, do whatever you need, pay your taxes, right? And you can carry on being gangsters.
Can I ask you this, T? Because he is a gangster. Of course he's a gangster, Putin, and he's worth anywhere between 600 million.
He's a gangster,
yeah.
But he's also a good manager of his country. He's brought wages right up. He's rebuilt infrastructure all over Russia. The ordinary Russian people, actually, you know what? I haven't seen this reported anywhere. His popularity rating in the Russian polls has gone up 60% to 70% over the last 2 or 3 weeks.
Those can be fixed, though, and you know that.
People have been waiting for around 8 years for something to be done about the NATO, the EU and the UN, Victoria Nuland, National Endowment for Democracy, CIA takeover of Kiev.
And that's all true.
Waiting and waiting, and Putin has finally acted.
Hang on, T. That's all true, every bit of that. But isn't Vladimir Putin the same Vladimir Putin who attended the Young Leaders program at the World Economic Forum? I mean, but these are real things. These are...
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
But look, he's KGB, he's FSB, right? So he's going along to these things.
So why do you trust him then?
He's done, I think? You know what he's been doing, I think, is he's been buying time, Richie. And now he's in the situation where the Russian military is confident enough to go and walk into Ukraine and say, no, NATO, you're not coming in here. We're going to get rid of all your Nazis here. We're going to get rid of all of your Stinger anti-tank missiles. And this country is going to become a buffer zone between NATO and us. And
this Nazi stuff, T. Tony Gosling is my guest, great journalist, former BBC journalist, presents the BCfm Politics Show every Friday at 5 on thisweek.org.uk. Find it, listen to it. Look, this Nazi shit, I know the president is dubious. I know he's a puppet of the United States. Everything you said about the 2014 fake Maidan revolution, you were bang on. You got it spot on. But the guy's Jewish. What's this Nazi crap? He's a Jewish guy, the president.
Yes, good question. And that was one of the questions asked of Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister, last week by one of the American journalists. Very good question. Look, the research that I've done, and you very kindly allow me to plug my book on your show, which is The Traitors of Arnhem. The research that I've done on the end game of the Second World War between the Nazis and the British mainly, the deals which were done, absolutely make it clear that Martin Bormann, who was Hitler's private secretary, he was the signatory on all the bank accounts of all the looted money from Europe over the Second World War period that have been squirreled away mostly in Switzerland, that he was brought to Britain at the end of the war and then sent over to Argentina. Now, there's two books which document this. One is Op JB by Christopher Crichton, which deals with the first part, getting him to Britain. And then there's Paul Manning's book, Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile, for which his publisher had his legs broken and his son was killed for writing. Paul Manning was a brilliant journalist in the United States, and this book was his swan song. But he then created 750 companies in order to launder this loot from the Second World War into through Sullivan and Cromwell, which was the Dulles Brothers law firm in New York. And those companies, they deliberately put Jews in charge of those companies who were sympathetic to basically to the mafia and the Fourth Reich, in order to camouflage the fact that it was Nazi money. So there's nothing, and there's no reason why Jews cannot be in charge of ex-Nazi organisations or even present-day Nazi organisations. I don't think, and I think in a way that the Nazis have kind of used him. Maybe he feels a bit embarrassed by this, but I think he should be pressed on it definitely, personally himself. But I haven't seen any Western journalists do that at all.
No.
So it could be that, he's sympathetic with the mafia and he doesn't care if he deals with a few Nazis, Jewish or not.
Let me give a plug to The Traitors of Arnhem. We've spoken about it before on the programme. It's an excellent read, folks. Do check it out. Thisweek.org.uk, Bilderberg.org, Amazon online. This has all the hallmarks of something that's going to go on and on and on. And you're talking insurgency. The West will keep funneling weapons into Ukraine. We know that foreign fighters who can't wait for a knees up, these military guys these mercenaries from the UK, from the United States, will go in there. And what you could have is an insurgency kind of a la Afghanistan. Now, I don't know anything about this. This is just my guess. And it might go on. And that's just going to be dreadful for prices and the cost of living here in this country, isn't it? If it does happen like that.
Well, look, our leaders have not been managing the economy very well. In fact, they've been, I think, deliberately destroying the economy through quantitative easing. They've been making sure that the property prices stay high, share prices are artificially pumped up through this QE money. Then we've also got the implementation of these horrific congestion charge zones. They're not actually for congestion. This is the ULEZ in London, etc., where people are having to pay £12 to just reverse their car out onto the road and back into the drive again every day. Whatever it is, even if they want to go down the road for, to buy some milk and they're disabled, they're having to pay to do this. So what's happening is our own leaders are actually causing this and creating this horrible crisis by imposing taxes on the poor. These are not the rich pay no tax, but you know what? The poor are starting to have to pay all these taxes off for years. So that's, I think, the reality behind this is that this is basically, Richie, a massive distraction. They're putting loads and loads of propaganda effort into saying, the brave Ukrainians, isn't it brilliant? Well, look, many Ukrainian men are basically being press ganged into fighting where they don't want to fight and die against the Russians. They'd much rather stay with their families. And I don't know if you've seen some of the footage of the Ukrainian military driving into places like grounds of hospitals, into grounds of schools, into big council, it looked like what you might call a council estate here in Britain. And the people saying, go away, we don't want you here because you're attracting trouble and violence. If you want to go and fight the Russians, go and do it somewhere else, not in a housing estate. And so we're getting a tremendous amount of spin and propaganda. But ultimately, this is a damn great distraction away from our own leaders' complete and utter failure. Number one, to manage COVID. And number two, to actually run this country in our interest. They're running it in their own private, personal interest. And we're looking at a disaster capitalism over here. That's what we're looking at. Complete disaster. And they intend to make more and more money out of, this doesn't work, we're going to have to privatize it. Let's sell it off to a hedge fund, and we're even seeing massive amounts of land being bought up, not by family farmers, but by, people who are working for these carbon offset companies, hedge funds, giving money to companies to go and buy land to plant trees. And that means that, ordinary families cannot farm because they've got this massive new market in carbon offset. So there's a whole load of stuff going on over here, which is completely destroying people's ability to make a living, Richie.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We've got some of the most fertile.
Really about what's going on in Ukraine.
You're right. We've got the most fertile land in the world here and in Ireland. We've got the perfect climate for it. I wrote about this recently, about the common agricultural policy, what it meant for farming. It's shocking to think you produce 52% of your own food. Isn't it amazing that when they talked about grain shortages and food shortages, you had BBC presenters like Nicky Campbell on Radio 5 Live the other morning saying that, we can't start farming again. We can't just farm. It's bad for the environment. Listen, we could talk about that for a long time, but because we've got only about 10 minutes left, if you do want to say something on that, you can, of course. But I also wanted to talk about, you see, you mentioned distraction, and I think you're totally right. And I think the war, while real for the people involved in it, is some sort of distraction creation. And I'm not trying to get the final word on that. I respect your opinions on it. But look, you've got Biden coming out, the US president, issuing an executive order demanding that a study is done on centralized digital currencies. I mean, Tony, that's where it's all going. And when cash is gone and money is completely digital, controlled by the central bank, well, I hate to be pessimistic because I'm not. I'm an optimist by nature. But we're finished, aren't we? We're finished if we go digital.
We are.
Absolutely
we are finished. We are finished as humanity because basically we will all be dependent on credits at some bank. There won't be anything of value that we're allowed to have. We would just have some sort of digital thing maybe on our phone, God knows, implanted in us or something that tells us how many credits we're allowed to spend that day. And if we, this is very much like the Chinese system, isn't it?
Yeah.
The social credit system over there. As soon as you start to misbehave, say you turn up with a Russian flag in the middle of Bristol and start waving it, oh dear, you will not be able to do it. This is slavery. Let's call it what it is. This is where they are taking us. And I'm not talking about the Russians. I'm talking about our own New World Order leaders. This is what they want. They are basically run by banks. That is, the love of money drives them, nothing else. And the power that they get over other people by taking away their money. And then they say, oh, look, they can't do anything. They're going to have to beg from us now. This is about power relationships between individuals. And this is not an accident, I don't think. I think it's a very, very well thought through and orchestrated evil program. And we're looking now, I interviewed for tomorrow's show, David Livingston, who I'd love to give a plug to if you don't mind.
Of course.
He's someone I've been interviewing over the last few years. And now David is a Canadian, and he's written the best book by far because he understands it so well on transhumanism. It's called Transhumanism, the History of a Dangerous Idea. And he understands that this is the fascism of today. This is the social Darwinism of today. These are the people who have no interest in our God-given rights or anything like that. They believe that it is their right and their task to engineer humanity, to genetically engineer humans, etc., so that they can perfect humanity. Well, that's just one part of it, Richie. As you know, there's a lot more to transhumanism, such as the takeover by artificial intelligence. They think artificial intelligence should be running society rather than human beings, democratically elected or otherwise. But they are basically the lords of chaos. And this is where I think it takes a bit of a leap of the imagination to understand who these people are and what they're up to. And David has sort of coached me, I suppose, a bit in this over the years, is that's actually, they believe in order from chaos. So this is the old adage of ordo ab chaos, is the Latin, which is they create, this is disaster capitalism, isn't it?
Create the chaos.
What they've been trying out in places like Libya and Iraq, places like that, where the regeneration has all been done by big Western companies. They've made an absolute fortune out of it. They now pretty much own those countries wherever they've done that. The Chinese are at it too, of course. That disaster capitalism is now coming home. So they're creating disasters here. They're creating chaos here so that they're their own image as the way they want to. So it's, I think, ultimately satanic. And I'm not saying that specific individuals are Satanists or whatever, but I think that the inspiration for it is definitely evil. It's a war on God, as Catherine Austin Fitz said, but God is going to win. These people are on a hiding to nothing, Richie, and their chaos is going to bite them on the bottom, shall we say.
Tony, what's David Livingstone's book titled again? What's it called?
Transhumanism, The History of a Dangerous Idea. But the first book of his I read was called The Dying God. And this is a great title for a book because it's about the sun. This is about the old pre-Christian religions and pagan religions, many of which were actually not anywhere near as bad as some people say, because that's all people knew. They worshipped the sun. So the dying God is the sun as it sets, and of course it gets resurrected the next day. That was the old religion. But he's also talking about the way that God is dying today. So it's two things in the one title, really. The idea of God being crushed slowly, using things like theory of evolution, but most importantly, using television to just discredit the whole idea of God, using education. So that, for example, when I was at school, we were taught, this is in the 70s, we were taught, you need to look at creation and evolution. Nowadays, the theory of evolution is not a theory, it's fact. And that, to me, is part of the slow crushing of God and the whole idea of that form of spirituality out of humanity. And, of course, at that point, once people have the spirituality crushed out of them, they're looking for another form of spirituality. And that's what I think that will be spoon-fed to us in the future once we start getting into real chaos. Oh, we'll be told we have a new form of a man-made religion, and it's much cooler than the old-fashioned, Judaism, Islam and all that stuff, which are old-fashioned anyway. They cause wars. We've got a new religion for everybody. So I think ultimately that's the satanic aim of all of this, Richie. And I will say satanic, although, of course, I think some people just simply jump on the bandwagon and they go along with it because it's a gravy train. There's loads of money in agreeing with these rich and powerful people. You can make yourself an absolute fortune. And, of course, there's secret societies pushing for this too. The Freemasons were, exposed in the 1980s big time in this country. In Britain, we had Stephen Knight and his book, The Brotherhood. Martin Short picked up on that when Stephen Knight died and republished a book 3 times better called Inside the Brotherhood, which exposed all the politics of Freemasonry and their involvement with the police, etc., etc. And then Martin made a 6-part ITV series all about secret societies and how they've infiltrated politics and the criminal justice system. So this isn't a fantasy. This is most definitely out there. And this is one of the reasons I like David Livingstone so much, is that he sees this as a sort of basically the thing that the historians have missed. They've missed out on the secret societies' influence over history, and particularly on Freemasonry and the importance of that in the Western world today.
Just a quick, by the way, you'll be able to hear Tony's interview with David Livingstone tomorrow, 5:00 Fridays, thisweek.org.uk, not the BCfm Politics Show with Tony Gosling and an array of brilliant guests. That's tomorrow. I might chat with you tomorrow or the day after. You'll be busy tomorrow because I wouldn't mind chatting with David myself and promoting his book.
Can I just say one thing about David? Is he's pointed out there is this group of fascists called the Accelerationists. Now these guys keep their heads down, right? But they are most definitely out there. Philosophy departments. They're basically mostly followers of Nietzsche, the philosopher Nietzsche, who was Hitler's favourite philosopher, of course. And that their idea is they want to accelerate Armageddon. So they want as much chaos as possible. So that is, if you're seeing around you inexplicable chaos, there are people out there who want it.
I know,
some friends of mine were saying recently, well, no one wants a war. No, well, you're wrong. Some people do want a war. And actually, there are people out there who make a fortune out of war, particularly if they're supplying both sides with weapons, and then they're coming back after the war has been won for the bill. There are people out there that make money out of war,
of course,
and that want war.
Smedley Butler, war is a racket.
They need to be properly examined and looked at. I mean, I've heard people going on about the Sabbateum Francus and all these various. No, the Pinay Circle is a far-right fascist international, and the accelerationists are almost like the operational arm of them. They're out there making sure that terrorist attacks against Muslims, this sort of thing. What's his name? Brenton Tarrant, the Christchurch mosque massacre guy. He was one of these. He had accelerationism in his manifesto that he published when he killed those 55 or so Muslims a couple of years ago in Christchurch. There are connections all around these terrorists. I mean, we saw also, by the way, Richie, did you see in Pakistan when Imran Khan came out and he abstained in the vote against Russia.
That's right.
The United Nations. Then suddenly there's a massive bomb. 50 or so Muslims killed in a bomb attack in Peshawar.
What a coincidence, T. And by the way, a government minister whose name escapes me was on Sky yesterday, and he was proposing that aid money that was due to be given to India is diverted to Ukraine. And the reason for that was because the Indian government won't denounce Vladimir Putin. It's absolutely incredible. Because they won't say, yeah, Vladimir Putin is a bad man, we disagree with him, let's hold some aid money back, which ties in with that bomb. And yes, chaos. Wow. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up.
I think they are. The lords of chaos are with us. Anyone that's read Michael Moorcock, as I did as a teenager, he was, writing about something which was actually quite, I think, I mean, it's all kind of science fantasy stuff, really. But at the heart of it is absolutely correct. There are people out there who get off on this whole idea of chaos. You look at, for example, Albert Pike, very important chap. He was Grand Master of the Scottish Rite in the United States back in the American Civil War. And his motto, what was it? Order ab chaos. Order from chaos. That was the Scottish Rite motto. And it still is, apparently. So, his idea was to create these 3 world wars. Now, I would say, this may be something Putin is into, knows about. I have no idea. The Russians, I would have thought, have got some idea. But certainly the First World War was basically a family squabble amongst the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha family between the Russian Tsar Nicholas, Kaiser Wilhelm, and our own king. The 3 of them having basically a family argument that turned into the First World War with tens of millions of dead in trenches. And the Second World War, that was also in this supposed Albert Pike letter, which disappeared from the British Museum, where he said, what we're going to do is we're going to have a Second World War. The main object of it is to have a massive fight between Russia and Germany, which is essentially what was at the heart of that war, as well as implementing the new state of Israel, which is a kind of Templar idea from the Crusades. And then the Third World War would be fought between the nihilists, he calls it, which are basically the Zionists. These are people who are using the Jewish religion, the Jewish faith, for their own ends, and Islam. And this, I think, is the key to understanding what is happening now and may well happen in the future. When, I have no idea. But, this tension between Israel and Iran is very important. Look at Prince Charles. He has positioned himself with an honorary degree in Islam from Cairo University, as was pointed out by one of my guests recently, as well as, apparently, according to Israeli TV and newspapers, he is in the line of David. So he's also positioning himself to be a Zionist Messiah. So he's positioned himself to be the perfect peacemaker in the coming World War III if it breaks out in the Middle East. Now, this is the sort of cynical thing I would expect from the Saxe-Coburg-Gothas, having started the First World War as well, Richie.
Catch up with Tony Gosling tomorrow, Friday at 5 o'clock in Bristol. Go to thisweek.org.uk, check out bilderberg.org as well, and find Tony's books on those websites. He mentioned The Traitors of Arnhem. He was very kind enough to send it to me. I can recommend it highly. It's a terrific read. It's absolutely fascinating. Would make an amazing screenplay, Tony. So it would. It's absolutely brilliant.
But the other books, people may prefer the other book, which is... It's called The Siege of Heaven Reader, which is really just an anthology of stuff I've taken from about 350 years, looking at secret government, the occult, Freemasonry, things like Winston Churchill, the groups that he was involved in. There was something called the Other Club, for example, during the Second World War, where all political persuasions met secretly in central London. This is the fascists sitting down with Winston, having a little chat, Mosley, people like this, quietly, very discreetly, right the way through the Second World War, which very many people don't know about. And that was revealed by his chauffeur in his biography when he published his biography after Churchill died. So, there's all sorts in that. The Siege of Heaven Reader is much more of an anthology, but the Traitors of Arnhem book looks very directly at these deals done between the Brits, specifically Desmond Morton, who was Churchill's private secretary, and Martin Bormann, who was Hitler's private secretary.
I recommend people get a copy of it. Listen, thanks for coming on today and giving us more time than normal. It's been brilliant to get your thoughts on everything that's been going on. 5 o'clock tomorrow, Friday, every Friday. Sounds like a great show tomorrow. It always is. Looking forward to hearing David Livingston. Thanks again, T. Have a brilliant weekend, and I know we'll talk again real soon.
Well, but just one quickie is that I didn't really answer your question about how long is this thing going to go on in Ukraine. I think you're right. I think what will happen is NATO will get the special forces in there. There's already a load of mercenaries being poured in there, and they're going to make it as much of a killing zone as they possibly can for the Russian army. But ultimately, Scott Ritter said to me, this is what the Russians do best. They will not last. As soon as they start trying to do irregular activities, ambushes and stuff on the Russian army, the Russians will take them out. So I would suggest this may go on and on, actually, and it may even turn into a third world war, Richie. So that's the thing that bothers me most.
Let's hope not. Godspeed, T. Thanks again for today. Tony Gosling, live on the line from Bristol, the great city of Bristol. Thisweek.org.uk, the Politics Show, not the BCfm Politics Show, tomorrow at 5, and that's every Friday. Check him out. Top man is Tony Gosling.